My husband sent me a text on a Tuesday afternoon that ended 38 years of marriage in 11 words. I was in my client's sunroom going over menus for her daughter's graduation party when my phone buzzed on the table between us. I glanced down out of habit. The text was from Norman. It said, "We need to talk tonight. Stay home." I finished the meeting. I drove home. And when I walked through the front door of my house and found Stacy sitting at my kitchen table like she'd already moved in, with Norman standing behind her and a spread of divorce papers fanned out across the same table where I had served 38 Thanksgiving dinners, I understood exactly what kind of talk it was going to be. Norman said, "I want you out by the end of the week." I picked up the pen and signed every page where my signature was indicated, neat, unhurried. The same handwriting I'd used to sign nursing intake forms and catering contracts, and 23 years ago, the deed to the house we were standing in. I put the pen down. I picked up my purse. "Good luck, Norman," I said, "but you forgot something." He was already turned toward Stacy, showing her the papers. He didn't really hear me. I walked out, and I let him forget. "Hello, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me today. My name is Mavis, and I'm speaking to you from Sarasota, Florida. I'm 63 years old. I spent 20 years as a registered nurse at Sarasota Memorial Hospital before I left to build a catering business that I have now run for 25 years. I have a daughter, Amanda, and 2 grandchildren who are the light of my entire life. And until this past winter, I was the wife of Norman Colton, a commercial insurance broker who I married when I was 25 years old and who I believed, despite all of our difficulties, I would grow old beside. I want to be clear about something from the start. Our marriage was not always unhappy. It was often hard, and there were years that were genuinely painful, but it was also full of ordinary good things. Sunday mornings with coffee on the lanai, road trips where we made each other laugh, the shared exhaustion of raising a child and building something from nothing. Norman and I were very different people who had, I think, genuinely loved each other for a long time. But marriages have chapters, and some chapters are the last one. Norman's father had lived alone in Naples for years, a stubborn, proud man who had worked in commercial real estate his whole life and refused to accept help from anyone until he could no longer pretend he didn't need it. When he was diagnosed with early-stage dementia about 2 years ago, Norman and I agreed to split the burden of checking in on him. I drove down most weekends. I cooked batches of food he could heat up through the week. I called his doctors, coordinated with his pharmacist, helped him organize and label his medications. It was a lot of work, but it felt like the right thing to do, and honestly, I liked his father. He was difficult in the way of men from his generation. Not cruel, just unused to asking for anything. Norman came less often as the months went on. He said work was busy. He said the drive was getting to him. I told myself I understood. What I didn't know was that his father's home health aide, hired through a private agency in Naples, was someone named Stacy. I met her exactly once, on a Saturday in the fall. She was leaving as I arrived, keys in hand, a large tote bag over one shoulder. She was 34 years old, bright-eyed, with the kind of careful friendliness I took for professional warmth. We exchanged names. I thanked her for her work with him. She said it was her pleasure. I thought nothing of it. Norman's father passed away in January. Quietly, overnight, the way the hospice nurse said was often how it went for people who had made peace with things. Norman didn't grieve the way I expected. He went quiet for a day or two, then he became strangely energized. He started going to the gym, something I hadn't seen him do in 15 years. New shirts appeared in the closet, a style I didn't recognize as his. His phone, which had always sat on the kitchen counter in the evenings, was now kept in his pocket, face down, password protected. I am 63 years old. I have been paying attention to people my entire adult life, first as a nurse, then as a business owner who has to read a room to serve it well. I recognized what I was seeing. I just did not want to be right. Then came the text, and then came home, and Stacy at my table, and Norman standing behind her with his hands on the back of a chair, like he was presiding over something. He told me his father had left him $1.8 million. He said the estate had been in probate for several weeks, but was now settled. He said this had given him the chance to think about what he really wanted. And what he really wanted, he said, did not include me. He told me I could keep my catering equipment. He said he was being generous. Something in my chest went completely still, not shattered. Still, there's a difference that I think anyone who has lived long enough will understand. I signed the divorce papers without a word and left. I sat in Amanda's driveway for a long time before I could make myself go to the door. She came out and met me halfway up the walk. She made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything from the beginning. The text, arriving home to find Stacy already there, the divorce papers, the inheritance, all of it. Amanda's face moved through several expressions before it settled into something very controlled and very quiet, which has always been how she looks when she is at her most angry. Then I told her what Norman had forgotten. 12 years ago, we had a crisis. Norman had invested a substantial portion of our savings into a franchise opportunity that turned out to be deeply mismanaged. When the company was sued by multiple franchisees, our family assets were potentially exposed. Our home, our savings, everything we had built together. Our attorney at the time strongly recommended that we transfer all of it into my name alone to protect it from any potential judgment. The house, the investment account, the savings account. All of it moved into my name legally and completely. At my insistence and at the attorney's recommendation, Norman also signed a postnuptial agreement. It stated, in plain language, that in the event of divorce, I retained full ownership of all assets held in my name and was entitled to an equitable share of any assets Norman accumulated thereafter. It was a legal document, properly notarized, filed correctly. The franchise lawsuit settled within 18 months. We never spoke of the agreement again. Life continued. The documents went into a folder in the filing cabinet in my home office. My home office, in my house, which was in my name. Amanda stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, "He has no idea. He has no idea." She reached across the table and took my hands. "Mom, we need to get you a very good lawyer." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at Amanda's kitchen table long after she'd gone to bed and read everything I could find about Florida family law. Florida isn't a community property state, which I had not known, but it does require equitable distribution of marital assets. Inheritances can be classified as separate property, but they can also lose that classification through commingling if inherited funds are mixed with marital money. I pulled up our old joint checking account and scrolled through the February statements. There it was. A deposit of $175,000 in the third week of February, sitting in our joint account for 11 days before being withdrawn to a new private account. Norman had transferred part of his inheritance through our shared account. Maybe by accident. Maybe because it was the account number he knew by heart after 38 years. It didn't matter why. The fact was there in the transaction history, team-stamped and clear. I printed it at 2 in the morning on Amanda's printer, added it to my folder, and made myself go to bed. Angela Moore's office was on Main Street in downtown Sarasota, a clean, organized space that felt like it belonged to someone who had no time to waste. She was in her late 40s, close-cropped hair, reading glasses on a cord around her neck, with the focused stillness of a person who has spent 20 years helping people through the worst situations of their lives and has learned to move through it efficiently. I spread everything on her conference table. The post-nuptial agreement, the property records, the bank statements, the catering business registration documents, my tax returns showing 25 years of business income under my name. She read in silence. When she finished, she set her glasses down. "Mr. Colton made several significant errors," she said, "and I intend to hold him accountable for every one of them." She walked me through Florida's equitable distribution law, the enforceability of the postnuptial agreement, the implications of the commingled bank transfer. She also noted that my catering business, a sole proprietorship operated in my name for 25 years, with its own tax ID and its own banking, would be classified as my separate property. Based on our revenues and client base, she estimated its independent value at somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000. She also said something I found clarifying. When one party wastes marital assets, spending what could be considered community money on an extramarital partner, Florida courts account for that waste in the final distribution. I hired a private investigator named Ray Torres the following week. He was a retired Sarasota County detective, soft-spoken and efficient, and apparently very good at what he did. Within 3 weeks, he had compiled a detailed record of Norman's spending since February. Restaurant charges, a 4-night trip to Key West for 2, a sapphire bracelet from a jewelry store on St. Armand's Circle that ran $4,200. He also showed me Stacy's Instagram page. It was public. She posted frequently. There were photos of the bracelet on her wrist. There were photos clearly taken in my kitchen, my lanai, my backyard, the bougainvillea I had planted 12 years ago visible in the background, the patio furniture I had chosen, the particular angle of afternoon light through my screened porch that I had always found beautiful and that now made me feel something I don't have a clean word for. She had captioned one photo, "New chapter, new home, so grateful." She had tagged Norman. She had posted a photo of a ring, a diamond solitaire on her left hand. The caption said, "He finally asked." I said yes 1,000 times over. Norman had proposed to her. In my house, while we were still legally married, while divorce proceedings were pending. I brought this to Angela the next morning. She looked at the printed photographs, the timestamps, the captions. Then she looked at me. "He just gave us everything we needed," she said. The emergency hearing was a Thursday morning in March. I wore a gray blazer I had bought years ago for hospital board presentations. Amanda sat directly behind me. Angela stood at the podium with a tabbed binder she moved through with practiced efficiency. Judge Lisa Farrow presided. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, with the expression of someone who has seen enough of human nature to no longer be surprised by any of it. Angela laid it out methodically, the post-nuptial agreement and its terms. The property records showing the house in my name alone, the $175,000 commingling. The Instagram evidences. Stacy photographed inside my home, living there since the week Norman handed me divorce papers. The bracelet, the Key West trip, the engagement announcement dated while we were still married. Norman's attorney was a young man named Gary who kept straightening his jacket. He argued that the post-nuptial agreement had been signed under financial duress a decade ago. He argued the bank transfer was an administrative oversight. He argued Norman had a reasonable expectation of access to a home he'd lived in for over 20 years. Judge Farrow looked at the property record. Then she looked at Norman. "The home at this address is titled solely in your wife's name," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you moved another woman into that home without your wife's knowledge or consent in the middle of divorce proceedings." Gary started to speak. Judge Farrow held up one hand. "Yes or no, Mr. Colton?" A pause. "Yes, Your Honor." The ruling took 15 minutes. Norman and Stacy had 72 hours to vacate my home. His accounts were frozen pending full financial disclosure. He was prohibited from making discretionary purchases over $500 without court approval. I was awarded temporary spousal support. I walked out of that courthouse with Amanda beside me and stood in the parking lot in the March sunshine and breathed. The months that followed were not simple. Norman left voicemails I stopped listening to after the first one. His sister called twice to relay settlement offers. First, $250,000, and the house if I would sign away any claim to the inheritance, then $300,000 with the same conditions. Both times I said no. Both times I explained, quietly, that what he was offering was less than what Florida law entitled me to, and that what he wanted me to sign away was the very protection the postnuptial agreement had been written to provide. He and Stacy came to Amanda's house one evening in April, unannounced. Amanda met them at the door. I stood at the top of the stairs and listened to Norman's voice, tense, rising, saying I had manipulated the courts, that the postnuptial agreement hadn't meant what I was claiming, that I was trying to punish him for wanting to be happy. Stacy said something Amanda later declined to repeat. Amanda told him to leave. She said it once, without raising her voice. She said she would call the police if he was not off the property in 5 minutes. They left. Stacy didn't say anything on the way out. The final hearing was a Tuesday in May. Angela presented the complete case. A forensic accountant testified about the commingling and its legal implications. The original notary, who had witnessed the post-nuptial agreement signing, submitted a certified statement confirming its validity. Ray Torres's full documentation covered $11,000 in spending on Stacy across 4 months. The bracelet, the trip, the ring Norman had purchased, the restaurants and gifts recorded in receipts and bank statements, the Instagram posts were printed, time-stamped, and entered into evidence, including the engagement announcement, its date placing Norman's proposal squarely within our marriage. I took the stand. Angela asked me about my contributions across 38 years. I described working full shifts at the hospital while Norman built his client base in the early years of our marriage. I described managing every household account, every insurance claim, every school enrollment, every family medical emergency. I described driving to Naples nearly every weekend for 2 years to care for a man who was not my father, but who needed someone to show up, and I showed up, because that is what I had always done. Angela asked me about the post-nuptial agreement. I explained why we'd signed it, what it said, and where it had been sitting for 12 years in the filing cabinet of my home office. She asked me about my business. I described starting it in the spare bedroom of our first house 25 years ago with a folding table and a second-hand commercial mixer, building it client by client until it employed 4 part-time staff and served events across Sarasota County, building it in my name, in the margins of every other obligation I carried, and growing it into something real. Gary cross-examined me. He tried to suggest I was acting from bitterness, that I was punishing Norman for wanting a different life. I answered each question directly. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of, and I think that came through clearly. Norman testified. Gary had coached him carefully, but Angela's cross-examination was systematic. She established that Norman had lived in my house for 23 years without ever checking whose name was on the deed. She established that he had signed the post-nuptial agreement, his own signature, on the document now in evidence. She established the timeline of his relationship with Stacy, beginning during the months I was driving to Naples to care for his father. She asked him, when he sent me the text telling me to get out, did he know the house was in my name? He said he had forgotten. Judge Farrow wrote something on her notepad. She did not look up. The ruling came the following morning. The house, mine, separate property titled in my name confirmed as such by the court. The post-nuptial agreement, enforceable. Its terms governed the division of marital assets. The $175,000 commingled inheritance, marital property subject to equitable distribution. The spending on Stacy during the marriage, the bracelet, the trip, the ring, the documented gifts, totaling over $14,000, classified as waste of marital assets, deducted from Norman's share of the distribution. My catering business, my separate property, not subject to division. Spousal support, ordered, payable monthly until further order of the court. Attorney's fees, ordered to be paid by Norman in full, given his conduct throughout the proceedings. When the gavel came down, Amanda made a sound she quickly covered with her hand. Angela gathered her papers without expression, which I had come to understand was how she looked when she was satisfied. I sat still for a moment and looked across the courtroom at Norman. He was staring at the table. His attorney was already packing up quickly, the way people do when they want to leave before anyone speaks to them. I thought about the afternoon I signed those papers in my own kitchen. The way Norman hadn't really listened when I said he'd forgotten something. The way he'd already turned away before I even reached the door. I got up, I straightened my jacket, I walked out. 6 months later, I am sitting on my lanai on a December evening with a glass of wine and the bougainvillea doing what it does in December, which is absolutely nothing, and I find I don't mind. The house has been repainted, something lighter in the kitchen, a color I had wanted for years and never did because Norman preferred things the way they were. I took a solo trip to Charleston, South Carolina in September, walked the historic district for 4 days in comfortable shoes, and ate dinner alone each evening at restaurants where no one knew my name. I found this, being quiet and unhurried in a beautiful place, belonging entirely to myself, to be one of the finest experiences of my adult life. Through the family network, Amanda tells me that Stacy left Norman within 2 months of the court ruling, that the ring went back, that Norman is renting a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of town and telling people I took everything from him. I heard this and felt very little. Mostly, I noticed the evening air and thought about what I wanted for dinner. Norman believed his inheritance was going to buy him a clean page. A new beginning, consequence-free, built on the assumption that I was too tired, or too frightened, or too accustomed to small things to remember what I actually held. He forgot the post-nuptial agreement. He forgot whose name was on the deed. He forgot 23 years of documents I had carefully kept, and 12 years of financial decisions he had signed his name to without reading them again. I forgot nothing. I had never forgotten anything. And I am still here. If something in this story reached you today, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave me a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I read every single one, and knowing how far these stories travel means more than I can tell you. And please, if nothing else, remember this: know what you have signed, know what is in your name, and know that the years you gave were never nothing, no matter what anyone standing in your kitchen tries to tell you. Thank you so much for being here with me. Take good care of yourself.